Let's talk about it. Okay. Video on knob and tube. Okay, so recently I've been in a whole bunch of houses that all had knob and tube wiring, and I will tell you that there is one effective way to deal with knob and tube wiring, which is to tear all of it out and replace it with upgraded wiring. If you still have knob and tube wiring, that means the wiring in your house is over 100 years old right now. Now, almost no construction material lasts over 100 years. When they made knob and tube wiring, the wires were copper, and the coating on the outside was fabric covered in tar. And when they put in knob and tube wiring, it wasn't the ideal wiring system. When they put in knob and tube, it was kind of a second-rate system. They did have armored cable, but it cost twice as much to put in armored cable as it did to put in knob and tube. The other major problem with knob and tube is that in order to comply with code, modern code, specifically code section 394.19 clearances, you have to maintain 3 inches of clearance space around all the knob and tube wiring, which we don't do now because most people have blown in insulation to their attics, which means we have 0 inches of clearance around their knob and tube wiring, which means it's not only a code violation, but also a fire hazard. Let's talk about that for a minute. The other problem with knob and tube wiring is, now that it is not 1919, people have an enormous amount more electronics, and they want to add more receptacles, and so they're tacking on and splicing into their knob and tube. I'm not going to say I've never done it, and there are safe and effective ways to do it, but they are arduous, and they are always they're not as good as running a completely new circuit all the way back to the panel, and they're certainly not as good as tearing out all your knob and tube, getting rid of it, and upgrading your system. Knob and tube really hasn't been around, like, they kind of stopped putting it in altogether in the 40s. Even though there's still a code section, it is still legal to install it, although I don't know where you get it, but you could potentially still install it. That means for the last 80 years, it hasn't even been on the market. There hasn't been an effective way to like splice into that system. So the other problem with knob and tube is that it does not have a ground. Now, grounds accomplish a couple of things. One, they ground your electronics to keep voltage spikes and keep your electronics good. Two, they assist in operating your overcurrent protection devices, your breakers, during fault conditions. If your overcurrent protection devices don't operate during fault conditions, then they're not much good, and they're not going to protect anyone from like overcurrent, electric shock, and also, fourth problem with knob and tube is that it won't accommodate any of the more modern protective breakers. It won't accommodate an arc fault circuit interrupting breaker, and it won't accommodate a ground fault interrupting breaker. It will, however, accommodate a ground fault interrupting device, like a receptacle. So good to do that, which is good because according to the code, if you ever put in a receptacle and attach it to existing knob and tube, that receptacle should be a ground fault circuit interrupting breaker, because there's no ground wire in it. There's 2 legal ways to do that. You can put in the 2-prong 15 amp without a ground, and they still make those, or you can put a ground fault circuit interrupting breaker. The 5th problem with knob and tube is that over the last 100 years, this cloth wire has degraded significantly. Like, if you touch it, it will fall apart. And it's worn out. There's no knob and tube wire out there that's still like good and clean and nice and like effective, efficient, all put together, which means you have places in your house where you just have exposed wiring. And I know that you're not walking through your attic, but somebody is going to walk through your attic, maybe me, and I don't want to get shocked. Also, if anything metal, like, I don't know, housing shingles, ducting, nails, the trunk you put in the attic, has anything metal, you could potentially either arc that out and start a fire or electrify that entire object. And now you don't have just like a little electric exposed wire. Now you have an entire electrified AC duct, which could be significantly more dangerous than your little exposed wire. As time goes on, these things are going to continue to get more and more dangerous in your home. They're going to become a higher fire danger. They're going to be a higher risk of electric shock, and they're just going to become more and more outdated. So if you have a knob and tube, I'm not saying you should definitely hire me to replace all your knob and tube, which you definitely should. And I get that it's a sales pitch, but also like there's a sixth problem with knob and tube is that it has voltage leakage. What is voltage leakage? Okay. The insulative fabric that's around knob and tube wiring. So when it goes through those ceilings and walls, it's separated by about, I don't know, that far or this far or however far, and it's on little knobs. And when it goes through the ceiling joist, it has tubes, ceramic tubes. But when it goes into the devices, those fabric wires are essentially just wrapped around each other. And they could be an armored cable, or they could not be an armored cable, or could be, in some cases run through the wall. But at some point, they get right next to each other. And at some point, you have voltage between them. Like the voltage between them kind of leaks through. Which makes them ineffective. I had a customer who wanted to put like fancy new dimmers on her knob and tube, and I will tell you that those fancy new dimmers, they do not like that voltage leak across problem. It's just not good for them, and they don't understand it, they don't like it, and they have a really hard time controlling the lights. The seventh problem, and this is the future. I'm the future calling. At some point, house insurance companies are gonna get wise to the fact that people who still have knob and tube, their house is burned down. People who don't have knob and tube, their houses don't burn down. At some point in the future, there will be an assessment, and they will be like, does your house have a knob and tube? You are not insurable. In the same way that your car warranty is like, oh, you didn't take it to our guys, you don't get oil changes, your powertrain is not insurable anymore. They will be, at some point, your insurance company will be like, well, you have clearly spliced into this antique wiring. We are not going to insure anything electrical in your home. We're not going to insure you against fire. We're not going to insure any of your systems against failure. And you're just going to have to buy much more expensive insurance or upgrade your house anyway. I will tell you, we do work for a disaster cleanup firm, like a disaster recovery. So what happens is when your house burns down, these guys come in and they tear out all the drywall. After your house lights on fire, what happens is the fire department comes in and they flood your entire house. So now you have to rip out all the drywall and all the panels, a bunch of the electrical. It depends on how big your fire is, obviously. And I will tell you that I've been on several of these jobs, and there are 3 calls I've been on. Like three types of calls. One, electrical fire originating from old knob and tube wiring. That is the number one thing that I've personally been called out on. I'm not saying like that's statistics of the industry. Number 2 is remodels that have been done by homeowners or licensed contractors that have lit their house on fire. Let me plug a service for you, actually. If you're not, okay, one more minute. Plug a service. If you call us, we will advise you on how, if you are a homeowner who wants to do their own wiring, we will advise you, for free, obviously, on how to do that wiring, what's safe, what'll pass inspection, and, I mean, it's a good deal. Take us up on it. We will also wire in your panel if you'd like. So if you want to do all the branch wiring and we'll wire in your panel, we'll inspect your wiring and wire up your panel. Like it's a good deal. Do it. Where was I a second ago? Oh yeah, and the other one is like garbage fire, like their barbecue starts it on fire. So the number one reason we get called out to like do disaster cleanup is because this knob and tube wiring gets either like it just lights the house on fire because they have blown in insulation. B, people spliced into it to do renovations and it lights their house on fire. Or C, like their garbage can lights on fire and it burns their house. So if you have knob and tube, I'm just saying, seriously consider. And I will tell you, I did a one, like most recent job, I did a 1-story with a basement house, tore out all the knob and tube, and replaced it all with Romex. It took 3 days, and I think their total bill was like maybe $2,200 or something like that. I'll look that up. Maybe closer to 3,000. But it's cheap, man. It's cheaper than the tile in your bathroom. It's cheaper than your black splash. It's cheaper than a new shower. It's cheaper than a new water heater. It's like, and none of those things will burn your house down, man. So there you go. If somebody wanted to know my opinions on knob and tube, there you go.